Hi guys! Long time no see! Today I'm here to talk about all of my favorite books from 2024. So, it was not my intention to have taken such a long break. We moved shortly after my last video, and we were kind of hoping for a more permanent setup before we started filming again. But the housing market sucks right now, if you didn't know that. So we're still kind of in a temporary situation, but I didn't really want to go too much longer without filming because I miss doing this. I had a really good reading year in 2024. I feel like I've been pretty active on Goodreads. So if you like reading written reviews, feel free to follow me there. I am also trying to be a little bit more active on Instagram. I have a hard time kind of like making time to take photos and stuff, but I'm trying. So if I'm not posting on here a lot, I'm still trying to be active on other platforms. So jumping right into it, one of my favorite series from 2024 that I read was The Green Bone Saga by Fonda Lee. This comprises of the books Jade City, Jade War, and Jade Legacy, and they were so good. I read them pretty much back to back to back. They were very intense, but like so absorbing. Fonda Lee is such a master at like world building and especially character work. This series is really influenced by like mafia movies and also like kung fu movies, and it felt like a really great blend of the two. And then there was also this really fun sort of supernatural element. I just thought it was like a great combination of things, and it's like this epic family saga. You follow like mostly one generation of these two warring kind of gang families who are fighting for control over their country, and specifically the city of Janloon, and it's kind of like a proto-Japan. It's very inspired by their sort of history and culture, as well as their colonial history, because the further you get into the series, the broader the scope kind of becomes, and outside influences and other interests who are trying to get into this country and control a very rare mineral it's called jade, but it's got like magical properties that basically make whoever's wielding it a superhero. So you have these really intense street fights with basically like these superheroed people, and there's like knife fights and stuff too, but it's very built on this kind of honor system between these two clans, and just the world was so engrossing. We mostly follow a clan called No Peak, and it's sort of three sibling main characters, and what they bring as far as strengths to their family and how they each kind of view the situation going on with their rival clan, the Mountain. You see their decisions play out over decades, and it's just so good. I felt so attached to these characters. I could not put these down. I distinctly remember reading the climax of the second book, Jade War, on an 8-hour plane ride in a middle seat, and my poor boyfriend was sitting on one side of me, and this poor old lady who is a complete stranger was on the other side. And I was just like trying to keep my cool while like actually having a meltdown, because the climax of that book is so intense. Each of the books in this trilogy is just such a ride. There's really no like week one or like slog of any sort. I just felt like constantly tuned in to these characters, and I desperately wanted to know what was going to happen. This is one of the strongest trilogies I've read in a really long time, with some of the most captivating characters I've ever read about. I felt so attached to these guys, and I was like sobbing at the end of the last book just because it was over and I didn't want it to be, and you just felt like so attached to their lives. And I haven't read a lot of books like that. I'm not super into family sagas, or at least I haven't been in the past, but like this one did it for me. It was super impressive. I was really impressed by Fonda Lee. She's an auto-buy author for me now. I've read the other novellas in this series. I've picked up Untethered Sky by her as well, which is also excellent. So highly recommend this series, and I cannot wait to see what Fonda Lee does next. The next book that was one of my favorites in 2024 was The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I was so excited. I actually got to see Leigh Bardugo like in person at an event local to me, which is very rare. I kind of live out in like the boonies. So it was super cool that her tour stop included my city, and it was awesome to see her live. She was so funny and so captivating and such a wonderful speaker, and just everything she had to say about this book made me super hyped to read it. I'm pretty sure I picked it up almost immediately after that event. The story follows Lucia, who is a maid, and she's also secretly a Jew during the Spanish Inquisition, which is a very dangerous time to be anything other than a very devout Catholic. It is very charged and like tense just with that like fear of discovery. And she also has a power with like small magic, so she can kind of make minor miracles happen around her. And she's very discouraged by her family from displaying this, but her whole life in so many ways she's told no and to like not want things. And this whole book she spends her time taking what she wants. And it starts off with really minor transgressions, but it really blossoms into something just absolutely beautiful. There's also a really interesting romance at the center of this. It's not like the main element, but I really liked that subplot. And I don't know, this is just like my particular brand of historical fantasy. I know not every Leigh Bardugo reader is gonna love it, but I think like a lot of other readers will. It has that dark element that a lot of her other books do have, but it's just, it feels so lush and really well researched. I've always found this period of time to be really interesting, and just the effect that the church can have on everyday people's lives and sort of where you fall in the societal totem pole also is really affected by that. And it was just such an interesting read. Again, lush is the word that keeps coming to mind. Her writing has just really developed so beautifully since Six of Crows and the Grishaverse and stuff. So I'm really excited. I hope she does more stuff like this in the future. It seems pretty well received, but obviously you kind of have like some hardcore Grishaverse fandom people who are a little disappointed because it is so different from her other works. But I loved it. This was one of my favorite things that she's ever done. And I hope she does more like this because it was really beautiful. Another series I want to talk about, I think is actually super underrated. I've seen it around and I've seen the books around, but I very rarely see people actually talking about them. And that is the Rook and Rose series by M.A. Carrick. This is actually an author duo. I can't remember their names right now, but I'll post them here or in the description below. But it's one of those books that's like, you cannot tell it's written by more than one person. I think some books feel very segmented, or the author's voice just feels like it comes through very clearly. But this had such a distinct style that even though you're jumping around different characters, like it felt very cohesive. So this is sort of a Venetian inspired fantasy. It takes place in its own world, and it just has some of the most lovely world building I've ever seen. It has not one, but two pretty complex magic systems that the characters kind of start off as having them very separate, but they just become very beautifully interwoven as the trilogy goes on. Some of my most favorite characters I've ever read about, and if you love found family, this is a series you need to pick up. The first book really heavily focuses on one character. She's kind of a con artist. She grew up on the streets, and she sort of fashions herself into a unknown heiress kind of person and tries to insert herself in this wealthy family. Her lying and her secrets create so much tension. I'm like constantly, as I'm reading it, like, oh my God, someone's gonna find out what she's doing. Because just the audacity of some of her lies is incredible. But also there is a fabulous sort of masked vigilante thing going on, which is like, I never see in a book like this. It very much reminds me of like Batman and Catwoman, but in like a 14th or 15th century Venetian kind of inspired city. And I just thought that was so cool. This series really challenges oppressive political structures and colonialism in a really beautifully done way. You really feel how these characters and their individual peoples have been affected by this over like centuries of time, and what they're doing in like their modern day to address some very vicious wrongs that their people have encountered. And oh my gosh, it was so good. And again, the magic systems were just really cool. One feels very like kind of sciencey, and one's kind of like tarot cardy. I didn't think they were gonna work as well together as they did, but it was so fascinating. It is a little heavy up front on like like how dense and confusing some of that stuff feels. But by the end, like, you're figured it out. Like, you've got it. And the characters in this are just so good. Like I said, there's like the mass vigilante thing, and like their dynamic is really great. There's also this third character who's like kind of a spy master, and kind of he's two-faced in a different way, and he is just one of my favorite characters ever. So please, please, please pick this up. Like, this is like the series I'm advocating for the most here, because I feel like not a lot of people talk about it, and it's just so underappreciated. But it is one of the most beautifully written things I've ever read, and it was just so enchanting. The Broken Binding is actually doing this as their next part of their subscription, and I literally screamed when they announced it, because I finished reading it, I think, halfway through this year, and like I said, it's so underappreciated. I've been trying to get my friends and stuff to read it and spread the word on social media and stuff. So to see a book box pick it up and do these really beautiful editions made me so thrilled. I cannot wait to own them and display them on my shelves as like a beautiful centerpiece. And I already can't wait to reread this series one day. I think it's just gonna be one of those ones that like I just appreciate more and more, because there's so much world building, and I'm sure I missed some really interesting stuff in the first bit just because I was a little overwhelmed. But it's so worth pushing through that kind of maybe initial sort of block of pages where you don't really know what's going on, because the payoff is excellent, and it has one of the strongest third books in a series I think I've ever read. There were a little here and there plot points that weren't my favorite maybe, but like the closure is beautiful, and these characters all get their own awesome shining moments, and it was so good. The next book I want to talk about is Lightbringer from the Red Rising series. I'm not talking about this whole second chunk as like a whole, because I had a lot of struggles with Iron Gold and Dark Age. And while Lightbringer does make a lot of that like darkness and suffering worth it, those books still like were a bit of a mental drag for me. But Lightbringer was quite literally the light at the end of the tunnel. Going into the second phase of Red Rising, I knew certain things were going to have to be broken in order for there to even be a story. So I felt somewhat prepared for that in Iron Gold and Dark Age, but like some of the story choices were a little confusing to me, and it did sort of feel like in the beginning of Lightbringer that Pierce Brown decided to maybe edit some plot points out that were kind of dragging him down, and I thought that was so smart. I know that can be kind of difficult to manage so many plot points, and he introduced like even more antagonists in Dark Age than I thought were necessary. So it did feel like certain things got dropped, and you're like, wait, what happened to that plot point? But I think in the end, it will make the story stronger. Lightbringer just had like all the payoff I had been waiting for in the second arc of the story. Darrow struggling so much in the previous two books was so hard to read about, because like he's your hero character, and even though Pierce Brown has expanded the scope of the story to include like more point of views, Darrow is still like your fave, and so watching him struggle is just so hard. And I feel like he really had some shining moments in this one where it felt like callbacks to the first series, where, you know, he was able to kind of rise above the situation and just be a total badass. And like, that's what I've been reading this series for. It's so hard to talk about a book like this late in the game without spoiling things, but it's also one of those if you know sort of situations. There were some reconciliations, there was some confrontations that I've just been like waiting for several books now. Again, like Darrow is just like such a shining star in this book, and nothing makes my heart happier with Red Rising than seeing that from him. I am so excited for Red God. I really hope Pierce like sticks the landing like he did with Morningstar. And I need some like actual closure with these guys, because I need to know that like at least some of my favorites are gonna be okay. There's one character in particular, I cannot wait to see them get theirs. And I hope it happens in a beautifully creative way, because I know Pierce Brown can do that. So yeah, if you have read Red Rising and you've been kind of not sure whether or not to pick up Iron Gold, I would still say it's worth it. It's not going to have the same pace as the first three did. And I think if you go into it knowing that, you're going to be a little bit more prepared. And like the promise of Lightbringer hopefully is enough of a motivator to keep you going, because especially Dark Age, Oh my God, that book took me so long to read. Not that it was bad, but it was just like bummer after bummer after bummer. So it was nice to have what felt like a little bit more balance with Lightbringer. Onto what is probably my favorite romance of the year, we have Morbidly Yours by Ivy Fairbanks. This took me by such surprise. I'm pretty sure I saw this was indie published first, and then it's gotten picked up by a regular publisher, and I requested the ARC off of NetGalley for that, and oh my God, this book was so lovely, you guys. It follows an animator from like, I believe Texas, who moves to Ireland for a job and immediately has a really like silly meet cute with the next door neighbor who is an undertaker. She mistakenly receives body bags to her door, and so that's how they meet. She brings them over. This happens in like the first 5 pages, so it's not really a spoiler. She's so bubbly, and he is so visibly like kind of I don't want to say dour. It's like a very Barbie vampire visual dynamic between them, and I ate that up so hard. It's one of those stories where they just really bring the best out in each other, and they're both also dealing with grief and kind of overcoming that in their own ways, and it just really felt like a full package in a way that like a lot of romances try to do, but it often feels like they're stuffing too much in there, or like the balance between those subplots and then the romance just feels off. This one just nailed it perfectly. You see our main character kind of like struggling with like career things and just being a woman in like a male dominated field as well. And I feel like a lot of romances try to do that, but it just kind of overwhelms the story. But this was just so beautifully done. These two characters, I just wanted to like pinch their cheeks and put them in my pockets. They were so cute together. I'm so excited. There's another book in this kind of series. It's not following them, but it's like in the same realm. I believe the main characters know this couple from this book, and it's called Heartstrings. It comes out this year. I cannot wait. It looks so cute, and I really enjoy this author's writing, so this was a new favorite for sure, and this author's on my radar now because this was like the perfect romance book. The next book is The God of the Woods by Liz Moore, and this is kind of out of my comfort zone. I don't typically read a lot of mysteries and thrillers. I'm pretty solidly like a fantasy and romance gal, but every now and then I see a book that just seems to be like everywhere and everyone is talking about it, and I'm like, I get FOMO even though it's not my typical read, and that's exactly what happened with this one. I think I got it for $5 off at Barnes & Noble over the summer because they were like promoting the hell out of it, and I was like, okay, fine. I was also kind of tandem reading it with the audiobook, and the audiobook for this is excellent, by the way. But just the vibes of this story were so engrossing. This takes place in the 1970s in the Adirondacks, and it follows a bunch of kids at summer camp. The story starts off with a camper going missing, and she's not just a camper, she's also the daughter of the very wealthy family that owns the land that the camp is on. It's just such a wonderful exploration of sort of these really powerful families versus like the under or impoverished town that they kind of affect on a daily basis, and the ignorance of those very wealthy families. Just seeing everything come to a head was so well done. She really takes her time building this story brick by brick. Part of my complaint with mystery thrillers is that most of them are just like breakneck, like plot twist after plot twist after plot twist, Alex Michaelides kind of vibe, if you will. And this was such the opposite of that. It really had that like creeping tension that I think would really be well adapted to like an HBO limited series. Just everything built on itself really well. You follow several point of views trying to figure out what happened to this camper and what it has to do with another missing kid from like 10 years prior. Seeing that all come to a head was so exciting. Like I said, the audiobook was really good. If that's more your speed, highly recommend. I just think this was one of the best mystery thrillers I've ever read. It maybe because it leans a little bit more literary, but yeah, I was so surprised by this book. Again, totally out of my comfort zone typically, but I'm really glad I picked it up. Another favorite read from this year that really took me by surprise was The Ornithologist Field Guide to Love by India Holton. I have tried to read another work by this author and I hated it. Like, I DNF'd it in maybe 20-25 pages. So I was very hesitant to pick this one up because the first book I ever tried to read by this author was like such a failure. So I actually ended up trying out the audiobook on Spotify first because you get the 15 hours of audiobook listening a month or whatever. So it was pretty like low risk going into this, but I was curious because the premise sounded so charming. And I read another book this year called The Phoenix Keeper that kind of reminded me of that. So I knew it had elements that I was interested in, but I wasn't sure how this author was going to execute it. And oh my God, this book was so delightful. If you've read the Veronica Speedwell series, it kind of has similar vibes in which you have like two academics who have a lot of banter back and forth. But these people in this story both work in the field of ornithology. That means they're bird experts. I believe they're also both professors. They end up in this really wackadoodle competition for Birder of the Year, and just like the hijinks that follow. They're so ridiculous, but it's very like wink winky kind of thing. Like, it's very self-aware of how ridiculous it is. And I just think it made for a really cute read. The audiobook for this was also great. I feel like the narrator really captured the sort of Victorian era behavior and like accent really well. And that contrasted so nicely with sort of the modern sense of humor that was going on with this story. Don't go into this expecting like an actual realistic historical romance. Certain social conventions are totally ignored and others are like very pointedly made fun of. You have kind of this like only one bed trope thing that keeps coming up, but it's like it's too many beds in one room in one scenario, and it's like it's so funny. And the birds in the story are also magical, which adds another layer of ridiculousness. Some of them are like very intense killers. Some of them have like frost powers or fire powers. One of them is like said to have really magical like healing abilities. Like I said, lots of hijinks, lots of shenanigans, Veronica Speedwell vibes, but like less murder mystery, more silly romantic hijinks. And I just think that made for such a fun time. So I went and picked up the book because I was loving it so much. And I'm definitely going to be picking up the next book, which I believe has to do with geologists. And they're already married, but it seems to be a marriage of convenience in which they actually fall in love in the book. So very curious to see how that turns out, and I hope the fun times continue because I was so charmed by this book. And finally, this was the year of Brando Sando for me. I finally picked up the Stormlight Archive. I so firmly believed I was going to read Mistborn before I picked this series up, but there was so much hype surrounding the release of Book 5, Wind and Truth, that I wanted to be part of it, like, desperately. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to finish these by the time Wind and Truth comes out, but I'll at least, like, know the characters well enough to, like, be able to follow some of the zeitgeist that was happening while also hopefully avoiding spoilers. And I actually, like, ripped through these a lot faster than I expected to. I finished Rhythm of War a week after Wind and Truth came out, so I think I did pretty well. I was so intimidated by these before picking them up. Like, look at, they're all over 1,000 pages. Like, these are insane. That alone, I was just like, oh my God. Plus they're epic fantasy. I was like, I'm gonna get so lost. I don't know why. I read so much fantasy. I should be used to this by now, but it just felt like a different flavor of fantasy than I have been reading in the past. So I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I have read other Brandon Sanderson books, but they've been kind of like the one-off ones, like Elantris or Warbreaker. And for some reason, those felt so much more manageable. Even the Secret Projects, I was like, okay, these are like connected to the Cosmere, but they're their own thing. Where this and Mistborn feels so central to the Cosmere, I was worried I'd be lost. All that said, I think you can actually jump into these pretty well. The one book that I would say would be, it's not required reading, but like the most helpful thing to have read before this is actually Warbreaker. So I was really delighted when certain things came up where I was like, I know what that is, which was not a feeling I was expecting to have going into this. I definitely thought I was going to be very clueless. And I've said it in the past about his other works, and I'll say it again here and now, but he is just so good at world building. Like, he's so thorough about writing, or even just like thinking about what like a world looks like, and then what the flora and the fauna in this world look like, what the weather is like, and how all of that impacts its peoples. I think is like a level of world building you just don't see most authors even think about doing. It feels so comprehensive, and it makes these characters and this world feel so much richer and more real for it. And despite the length of each of these books, they are so palatable. Like, I know he gets some criticism for his prose, but honestly, I think if it was any more flowery, it would be a much denser read, and I don't think that's what people are looking for out of his books. Even though his prose is on the plainer side, it still captures this world very beautifully and these characters very beautifully. And I think the way he chose to structure these and pace them really helps you understand these characters on a very deep intrinsic level that just really fleshes this whole world out and makes you feel very attached to everything that's going on. The stakes in this series are so high, but like you also really care about the little moments that these characters have, or like the little breakthroughs that they have along the way. This series tackles mental health in like more than one way that I think is just so well done. I'm really blown away by the growth that I've seen in Brandon Sanderson as a person and as an author with this series. Like I said, I have read some of his older works, and while they were fine, they didn't like blow me away or make it so like that's all I could think about while I was reading it. But Stormlight Archive is just on another level. I've been listening to podcasts, I've been reading Reddit threads, trying to avoid spoilers for Wind and Truth, obviously, but like I just feel so engrossed by this world and its characters, and I think he's done something really magical with this series. I'm so glad that I finally put my intimidation aside and decided to pick them up this year. I still need to read Mistborn. I'm gonna do it, but now I feel like I have so much more momentum and like energy to do that, where those also intimidated me in a slightly different way before. So I'm currently reading Wind and Truth. It's the beginning of the 2025 now. I kind of did that on purpose because I was trying to reach my 100 book goal for the year, and I knew picking up another 1,300 page book was gonna prevent that. And I figured what better way to kick off 2025 than with the last book in the Stormlight Archive series for this first arc. Apparently there's gonna be 5 more. My God, this man. But yeah, I just had such a fun time with this series, like way more fun than I thought I was gonna have. There's definitely some high drama moments, and there's some very like low mental moments for these characters, but man, the Sanderlanches in this book are incredible. Like, they're the kind of books that like give you an adrenaline rush as you're reading parts of it, and I just think that's so hard to do. So good on you, Brando. I am so happy I read these this year. And that's gonna wrap it up for my favorite books of 2024. I definitely had other 5-star reads this year that I wish I had time to talk about, but I'm trying to avoid this being an hour-long sort of reintroduction. And yeah, again, if you want to follow me maybe on like Goodreads, I definitely post a lot of reviews and stuff there as well, so feel free to follow me along there. But thank you so much for watching. Sorry again for the very long break. If you're a subscriber, if you're new here, then I have a ton of other videos you should check out. My hair might look a little different in those, but it's been a year, so what are you gonna do? Hopefully it won't be another year before I post another video. Probably won't be back to the same cadence as previously for a while, but I do hope to post more this year. So let me know maybe what kind of videos you'd like to see from me this year, or what you're reading in 2025. I'd love to hear it. What did you read in 2024 that was a favorite? Please, I miss you guys. Say something in the comments and I'll be very happy. Until next time, have a nice day. Bye.